If you think project managers mostly manage tasks, this video is going to change how you hear every meeting you sit in. Because the reason good project managers seem calm even when nothing looks wrong isn't because the project is easy, it's because they're mentally running the project forward all the time. They're constantly thinking about what today's decision breaks, who it affects, and what needs to happen next before things will quietly stall out. And if you don't learn how to think this way, you can work on projects for years and still feel like you're just reacting instead of actually running anything. In this video, I want to walk you through how experienced project managers actually think moment by moment while everyone else is just focused on their own piece of the work. When you sit in a meeting as a project manager, you're not just listening to what's being said, you're listening for what changes because of what's being said. For example, someone suggests what sounds like a small adjustment. Maybe it's a slight change in scope or a tweak to a requirement or a new dependency that shouldn't be a big deal. While other people are reacting to the idea itself, the project manager's mind is immediately moving forward. You're thinking about whether that change affects the timeline, whether it adds scope, whether it introduces a new risk, and which teams are going to feel the impact first. That thinking isn't abstract, it's actually very practical. You're asking yourself things like, if this slips by a week, what depends on it? If we agree to this now, what expectation does it set? If this goes wrong, where does it show up later? This is why project management is very mentally draining, even when projects look calm from the outside. Most of the work isn't visible. It's happening internally. A lot of project manager thinking is just forward looking. You're really focused only on what's happening in the room. You're focused on what this leads to. For instance, when someone says this should be done by next week, a project manager doesn't just hear a date. They immediately think about what work depends on that being true, whether the team actually has a capacity to hit it, and whether anyone else is already planning around that assumption. That doesn't mean you push back everything. It means you're mentally mapping consequences so you're not surprised later. This is also why project managers often ask questions that feel slightly out of place to others. They might ask about stakeholders who aren't in the room. They might ask how another team might be affected by this. They might ask what happens if the assumption turns out to be wrong. And from the outside, that can sound unnecessary or overly cautious. From the inside, it's called risk prevention. Most of the time, this thinking doesn't result in immediate action. It turns into a follow-up to schedule, a dependency to track, a conversation to have privately later on. And because it's quiet work, it's easy to miss. But when that thinking doesn't happen, projects start to feel chaotic. Small issues turn into big ones. People feel blindsided by decisions. Trust starts to erode, and no one can quite point to the exact moment where things went off track. This video isn't about tools or templates. It's about that internal loop, constantly scanning, anticipating, and sequencing that experienced project managers use to keep work moving forward. Once you understand that way of thinking, the rest of the role starts to make a lot more sense. One of the biggest misconceptions about project management is that time, scope, and budget are things you can check occasionally, usually in a tracker or in a report. In reality, an experienced project manager is thinking about those three constraints almost constantly, even when no one is talking about them directly. It happens in real time. Someone proposes a change during a meeting. Before you respond out loud, you're already thinking through what that change actually means in practice, not just the change itself, but the trade-offs that it creates. If we do this, what gives? Does the timeline move? Does scope expand? Does cost increase? Or does the team absorb it? Or does the team absorb it through extra effort? Even when no one says it explicitly, a trade-off is always being made. For example, someone might say, this should be a quick change. A project manager doesn't take that statement at face value. They immediately start unpacking it. They think about whether the change requires testing. They think about whether it touches another system. They think about whether it pulls someone off higher priority work. They think about whether it creates rework later on. That mental process isn't about slowing things down or blocking progress. It's about avoiding surprises. Experienced PMs learn very quickly that small changes rarely stay small. A minor scope adjustment can ripple into the timeline. A timeline shift dependent teams, and those impacts often show up weeks later when they're much harder to fix. And that's why a project manager is always asking internally, where does this show up downstream? Another part of this mental math that people don't always notice is thinking about who absorbs the cost of the decisions. Sometimes the cost is money, sometimes it's time, and very often it's people. If a deadline stays fixed but scope increases, someone is paying for that with longer hours or added stress. If scope stays fixed but time compresses, quality often takes a hit. If budget stays fixed, resourcing becomes constrained. None of those outcomes are neutral. A good project manager is always aware of these dynamics. Even if they don't spell them out, in every conversation. They're listening not just for what's being asked, but what's being assumed. This is also why project managers often slow conversations down with clarifying questions. It's not because they enjoy complexity, it's because vague decisions are very expensive later on. When someone says, let's just move forward and figure it out, a project manager is thinking, figure out what exactly and when. Moving forward without clarity doesn't remove risk. It just pushes that risk into the future. Over time, this way of thinking becomes automatic. You're not consciously running a checklist every time. You start recognizing patterns. You've seen how these trade-offs play out before, and your brain fills in the gap. That's why experienced PMs can look calm while they're processing a lot of information. They're not ignoring details, they're prioritizing which details matter right now. This constant mental math is one of the reasons project management is cognitively demanding. You're not just managing tasks, you're managing consequences. And once you start seeing projects through that lens, it becomes very hard to stop thinking like a project manager. So hopefully now you have a better understanding of how project managers actually think, what they're doing in meetings, and how they're approaching questions and assumptions in their projects. And hopefully this will help shape your mentality for how you should be thinking when you go into your next PM role. Hopefully you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and if nothing else, I would like to invite you to our live PMO where you can actually gain real hands-on IT project management experience and see how real project managers think in a real environment. So click the link below and I'll see you on the next video.